Imagine boarding a luxury ocean liner, expecting nothing more than a peaceful journey across the Atlantic. Families wave goodbye from the dock, passengers settle into elegant dining rooms, and children explore the massive ship with excitement. Everything feels ordinary, safe, predictable. Now imagine that before most people even wake up the next morning, more than 1,000 lives are gone. When people think about famous shipwrecks, one name almost always comes to mind: the Titanic. But just 2 years later, another passenger liner suffered an even faster, and in many ways more terrifying disaster. Unlike the Titanic, which remained afloat for nearly 3 hours, this ship disappeared beneath the water in only 14 minutes. 14 minutes were all it took to turn a routine voyage into one of the deadliest maritime tragedies of the 20th century. The ship was called the RMS Empress of Ireland, and on the night of May 29, 1914, she was carrying 1,475 passengers and crew through the cold waters of Canada's St. Lawrence River. Many of those on board were asleep, completely unaware that danger was only moments away. They never had the chance to understand what was happening. What makes this tragedy even more heartbreaking is that the Empress was considered a modern and reliable vessel. She carried lifeboats, advanced safety equipment, and an experienced captain, yet none of those precautions could overcome the one thing no crew could control: time. Because when disaster struck, 14 minutes simply weren't enough. When the RMS Empress of Ireland entered service in 1906, it quickly earned a reputation as one of the most dependable passenger liners crossing the North Atlantic. Operated by the Canadian Pacific Railway, the ship connected Canada with Europe, carrying thousands of travelers every year. For many immigrants, it represented hope and a fresh start. For others, it was simply the fastest and most comfortable way to reach home. Unlike some luxury liners built only to impress the wealthy, the Empress welcomed people from many different backgrounds. First-class passengers enjoyed elegant dining halls, spacious lounges, and beautifully decorated cabins. Meanwhile, families traveling in second and third class found the ship clean, organized, and surprisingly comfortable for long ocean journeys. It was designed to make every passenger feel secure. Behind the scenes, an experienced crew kept the massive vessel running smoothly. At the helm was Captain Henry George Kendall, a respected sailor who had spent decades navigating challenging waters. His calm leadership and knowledge of the St. Lawrence River gave passengers every reason to believe they were in safe hands. On the evening of May 28, 1914, the Empress departed Quebec City for Liverpool, England. The atmosphere on board was relaxed. Some passengers gathered for conversations after dinner, while others enjoyed music before returning to their cabins. Children had already fallen asleep, and crew members prepared for what they expected would be another routine overnight journey. No one could have imagined that only a few hours later, an invisible wall of thick fog would transform that peaceful voyage into a race against time. And somewhere ahead, another ship was quietly moving through the darkness, on a course that neither captain wanted, but neither could completely avoid. Shortly after midnight, the RMS Empress of Ireland continued its journey down the St. Lawrence River under calm conditions. The water was smooth, the engines maintained a steady rhythm, and most passengers were fast asleep. To everyone on board, it seemed like just another peaceful night at sea, but nature had other plans. As the ship moved farther into the river, a dense blanket of fog began forming across the water. Within minutes, visibility dropped dramatically. Lights that had been visible only moments before disappeared behind a wall of gray mist. Even experienced sailors knew that navigating through thick fog demanded patience, clear communication, and careful judgment. Captain Henry Kendall immediately ordered the ship to reduce speed and sound its fog whistle at regular intervals. These powerful blasts were the only way nearby vessels could detect each other's presence when sight was no longer reliable. Somewhere beyond the fog, another ship, the Norwegian coal carrier SS Storstad, was also making its way through the same narrow stretch of river. The crews of both ships heard each other's whistles long before they ever saw one another. Based only on sound, each captain tried to determine the other's position. But in heavy fog, echoes can be misleading. A slight misunderstanding of direction, combined with the slow movement of both vessels, began creating a situation neither crew fully understood. Then, almost without warning, the fog briefly shifted. For the first time, the officers on both bridges caught sight of the other ship. By then, they were far closer than anyone had expected. Within seconds, desperate orders echoed across both vessels as sailors rushed to avoid the impossible. But the river had already set the stage for a disaster that would unfold faster than anyone believed possible. The moment the fog lifted, both captains reacted instantly. Orders were shouted across the bridges as engines reversed and helms were turned in desperate attempts to avoid disaster. But there was almost no time left. The SS Storstad, a heavily loaded Norwegian coal ship with a reinforced steel bow, emerged from the mist and struck the starboard side of the Empress of Ireland. The impact was violent. Metal screamed against metal as the Storstad's bow tore a massive opening deep into the passenger liner's hull below the waterline. For a brief moment there was silence. Then came the sound that every sailor fears, the unstoppable rush of seawater flooding into the ship. The damage was far worse than anyone first realized. Thousands of tons of icy river water poured through the torn steel, flooding engine rooms and lower decks within seconds. Crew members raced through the corridors, pounding on cabin doors and shouting for passengers to wake up. Many people were confused, believing the loud crash was nothing more than a mechanical problem. But as they stepped into the hallways, they found water already rising around their feet. Captain Kendall immediately ordered the crew to send distress signals and prepare the lifeboats. Every second mattered, yet the Empress began listing sharply to one side, making it almost impossible to lower many of the boats safely. Some lifeboats slammed against the ship's side, while others could not even be launched because the deck had tilted too far. Panic spread quickly as families searched desperately for one another. Children cried, crew members fought to maintain order, and with each passing minute the ship leaned farther into the freezing river. No one on board realized that they had already lost half of the precious time they would ever have. As the Empress of Ireland leaned farther onto her starboard side, the ship transformed into a maze of confusion. Floors became walls, staircases turned into steep climbs, and every step required a desperate fight against gravity. Passengers struggled to keep their balance while icy water continued rushing through the lower decks. Many people never reached the lifeboats. Cabin doors became difficult to open as the ship twisted under the pressure of the flooding compartments. Some families were separated in the darkness, calling out names that disappeared beneath the growing roar of water and collapsing furniture. The lights flickered, casting long shadows through hallways that only minutes earlier had felt perfectly safe. Despite the chaos, remarkable acts of courage unfolded everywhere. Crew members ignored their own chances of escape, choosing instead to guide frightened passengers toward the upper decks. Several sailors continued helping women and children into life jackets, even after realizing there would not be enough time to save themselves. Some passengers gave away their own life preservers to strangers, believing those with young families deserved a better chance to survive. Captain Henry Kendall remained on the bridge, directing every possible rescue effort, while distress rockets shot into the dark sky. Nearby ships immediately recognized the emergency and turned toward the disaster, but the freezing river left almost no margin for hope. They were racing against a clock that was moving far too quickly. Then, only 14 minutes after the collision, the impossible happened. The enormous passenger liner rolled completely onto her side, before slipping beneath the cold waters of the St. Lawrence River. Hundreds of people were suddenly thrown into the freezing darkness, where survival depended not only on determination, but on how long the human body could resist the deadly cold. The Empress of Ireland had 14 minutes. Investigators from Canada and Britain immediately began collecting evidence. Survivors were interviewed, officers from both ships gave detailed statements, and every decision made during those final moments was examined. At the center of the investigation stood two captains, each convinced that the other had made the critical mistake. Captain Henry Kendall of the Empress of Ireland argued that his ship had been navigating carefully through the dense fog. According to his account, the Storstad unexpectedly changed course at the last moment, leaving almost no opportunity to avoid the collision. The officers aboard the SS Storstad, however, presented a different version of events. They claimed that the Empress had altered her position in the fog, creating a dangerous situation that neither vessel could escape in time. With visibility reduced to only a short distance, proving exactly what happened became incredibly difficult. The thick fog had hidden the crucial moments, leaving investigators to rely on conflicting testimonies, navigation records, and the memories of exhausted sailors who had just survived one of history's worst maritime disasters. In the months that followed, separate inquiries reached different conclusions. Canadian investigators largely blamed the Storstad, while Norwegian authorities defended their own crew. Even today, historians continue to debate the exact sequence of events that led to the collision. But while officials argued over responsibility, thousands of grieving families cared about something far more painful. No investigation could bring back the people they had lost. In the weeks following the sinking of the RMS Empress of Ireland, newspapers across Canada, Britain, and Europe filled their front pages with heartbreaking stories. Families searched for missing loved ones, rescue workers shared emotional accounts of what they had witnessed, and communities mourned one of the greatest maritime losses of their time. The disaster had claimed 1,078 lives, while only 397 people survived. It remains one of the deadliest peacetime shipwrecks in Canadian history. Yet despite its enormous human cost, the tragedy slowly disappeared from the world's attention. Only 2 months later, in July 1914, Europe was thrown into chaos as the First World War began. Newspapers that had once reported every detail of the Empress disaster suddenly focused on military mobilization, political crises, and battles that would reshape the world. As the war continued, the memory of the ship and its passengers faded into the background. Today, the wreck still rests beneath the waters of the St. Lawrence River, serving as a silent reminder of the lives that were lost in just 14 minutes. Divers who have explored the site describe it as both fascinating and deeply emotional, with many personal belongings still preserved by the cold water after more than a century. The story of the Empress of Ireland reminds us that history is not only shaped by the tragedies we remember, but also by those we almost forget. Behind every statistic was a family, a dream, and a future that ended far too soon. Perhaps the greatest lesson is this: even the strongest technology cannot replace careful judgment, clear communication, and respect for nature's unpredictable power. Sometimes history's most important stories are not the loudest, they are simply the ones waiting to be told again. Remember those whose stories were nearly lost to time, and keep history alive by sharing it with others.